Okay, thank you for joining me today at Freelancer School. Today we have with us a special guest, Will Bachman. He's a former nuclear trained submarine officer and Mackenzie alumni. He is the co-founder of Umbrex, which is a global community connecting over 600 top-tier independent management consultants across 40 different countries. And he is the host of one of my favorite podcasts called Unleashed, How to Thrive as an Independent Professional. I want to talk to him a little bit about that real quick to get started. But his podcast, Unleash, is an iTunes Careers Top 100 podcast. So if you don't subscribe to it, please do that right away. He is a graduate of Harvard College in physics, summa cum laude, by the way. If that wasn't good enough, he's summa cum laude, and a Columbia Business School. And we'll invite you to connect with him on LinkedIn, and I'll put all the links in the show notes on both YouTube and the podcast. Will, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Unleashed, the podcast. I love it. I don't know if it's is there a regular publication day?
Yes, we publish at least, I call it weekly plus. We do at least one episode a week.
Okay.
We always do an interview episode on Monday, and then periodically there'll be more of a essay type podcast with just me talking, episodes like 27 steps to set up your firm, or
Yes.
Recommendation on creating sample sanitized work. So there's some essay pieces which occur periodically, and then interviews every Monday.
Okay, so interviews are on Monday. Got that. Okay, I listened to your podcast when I'm at the gym, and I was just wondering, hey, it's today Thursday. Is Unleashed, is it a new one? Or, I couldn't quite get in that pattern. So thank you for explaining that. The first question I have for you, I think I told you before, I know I told you before the interview that I am a chemical operations sergeant, or I was in the Army, and you are also a nuclear trained submarine officer in the Navy. So I certainly know that a lot of the lessons I learned in the Army have carried over to my professional career. So I'm going to ask you the question, did any of those lessons learned in the Army as a nuclear trained submarine officer carry on to your professional career, especially as a self-employed professional?
They sure did. When you're I'd say one of the key skill for the 21st century, I think, is figuring out what to do next. And that was certainly something that was incumbent upon me as in the military, particularly when you're in port, and I was operating as the ship's duty officer, kind of responsible for the whole ship for one day while everyone else was off. Then kind of just figuring out what those next steps are and maintaining a list of all your action items, prioritizing those. That's a skill that's pretty widely transferable.
That's true. Yeah.
I'd throw in one other one, which is the Navy is big on checklists and formal operating procedures. And that served me well, both on operational improvement type projects, as well as, checklists are pretty widely applicable and useful anytime that I have to do more than two things.
Yeah, in Freelancer Masterclass, we talk about AAR, after action review, which is what I learned in the Army. It's basically after you do a battlefield exercise, or really any exercise where there's multiple troops and cohorts involved, you would go through a checklist of what went good, what went bad, how to make it better. Did you guys also do that in the Navy, something similar?
Mike, sure, and that's a great example, and that's a great practice that the Army really does very well. Similar thing in the Navy. Primarily after something goes wrong, we'd always do an incident report. It's a great practice to do on some periodic basis. I try to do it after every project wraps up, and also after the end of each week, to just reflect back on, hey, what went well this week? What could I have done better? Give yourself some feedback. It's really the best way to improve.
I do it in two main areas. I do it when I look at my monthly P&Ls for my company, profit and loss, and I also do it after each prospect call. I want to know how it went, how I can improve, maybe improve conversions. Maybe I talked too much or too little. Maybe I didn't ask the right questions. So I always do AARs for key areas of conversion of my company. So
do you do that as like a written thing, or just like in your mind, or do you actually write it down and document it?
Now it's in my mind, but for many years I did it written. And I had like an aggregate spreadsheet going so I can look at conversion numbers and all that stuff. So yeah, I was very, adamant about procedures, and I guess I still am, but everything was written back in the day. When I was trying to scale and have multiple employees, now I'm kind of consolidating and trying to do a lot of it myself. I have a couple key employees I rely on, but I just the Army taught me all those practices, you know. So let me ask you this: you own a company, you attended Harvard, Columbia, you own a farm, you wrote a children's book, which I've done, by the way. We should talk about the children's book. You've walked 800 kilometers through Spain. What's your next goal? What do you got going on? You're a very interesting, dynamic person.
Well, thanks, Mike. Let's see. Some of my goals going forward are, number one, looking for ways to kind of grow the audience of my podcast, Unleashed. Mm-hmm. I put probably a lot more effort in the first 200 episodes into creating content versus figuring out how do you grow the audience for that. Mm-hmm. So that's one area. Working on improving the website for Umbrex. What we're doing with Umbrex is we're working to create a community that connects top-tier independent management consultants with one another. And we feel we're really just getting started. We have a little over 600 members now, but we see that as more and more people become independent consultants or pursue that independent professional path, there's more and more opportunity and need to create those connections. So I guess the third thing I'll mention is I just finished recording a 70 video course on how to set up your own consulting practice. And so that's now being edited and getting ready for the website. So I'm hoping to have that live in 3 or 4 weeks.
Wow, 70 videos, that's great. Freelancer Masterclass has 68, so you beat me by 2, but we're always adding some. So what is the keyword there was connects, Umbrex connects. What is the purpose, what is the primary goal around connecting? Is it collaborating, sharing resources? Is it sharing leads and prospects? What's the goal there?
Well, it's all those things, Mike. There's a big opportunity to just share lessons learned. A lot of folks, they leave a large consulting firm, maybe directly, or they spend time, as head of strategy somewhere, and then they say, hey, I want to go set up my own practice. We know how to be consultants, right? How to do consulting, but running a consulting practice, as you know, with your show, is a much different thing. How do you write a statement of work, write a proposal, find an accountant, find a bookkeeper, find an attorney, do contracts, do your taxes, find a graphics person. All of these things, it's not something that you learned when you were at a big professional services firm.
Yeah, very true.
Just being able to have those hallway conversations with people that are going through something similar, that have a similar background, there's a lot of value in that. Yeah,
I can definitely see the value of that collaboration. We have something called the Inner Circle Referral Network, where all the Freelancer Masterclass graduates get together and share resources, right? So you don't have to tell me about collaboration, the importance of that. Super important. So what I like to do for these podcasts is give actionable advice, something that people, the audience, the listeners can take away. So let's talk about scalability and freelancers. Even freelancers that are experienced, but mostly this question is geared towards beginner freelancers, one that are just starting out and they can't even imagine, scaling their company to 6 figures or even beyond. So can you give our freelancers some advice on how they can scale their business faster than maybe a normal freelancer would who isn't listening to the show or podcast? Do you have any quick tips or actionable tips for them? I'll put you on the spot there.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first question is the first observation is that larger scaled is not necessarily more profitable.
Very true. Yeah.
Right? So that's a real decision to make, and I think that people shouldn't feel obligated to scale just because, people say, oh, you have a lifestyle business, just one person. You can be a very profitable freelancer as a one-person shop. And if you want to go that route, then you can, there's only 2 dimensions. It's a pretty simple formula. What's your utilization in terms of days per year and your rate per day? Mm-hmm. So you can try to either get more utilization or you can increase your rate per day. And the real way to increase your rate per day is increase the value that you can deliver to your clients by increasing your skills.
Yep.
So that's one path, right? So if you want to scale in that direction, it's about figuring out how you can deliver more value. And it's skills, but it's also the relationships that you have, what assets you own. So can you bring intellectual property to bear? Can you be a connector and connect other people to that client, right? What more value can deliver? If it is about scaling in terms of if you're trying to build a boutique practice as opposed to being purely a freelancer, Well, I can get into that, like what's entailed in that, if you want me to kind of.
Sure. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
All right. So for folks that want to go that path, number one is, and I'll grab this book off because I love this book by David A. Fields. Highly recommend The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients by David A. Fields.
Great. I'll have to add that to my reading list. I haven't seen that one before.
I've given out 100 copies of that book, and he really walks you through this. The first step is, if you're building a firm, is figuring out what clients are you going to serve and what problems are you going to work on. And David talks about, when you're thinking about problems you want to work on, the ideal problems are pervasive. A lot of clients have them. They're expensive if not addressed, and they're urgent. Even before you think about, do I have the skills to solve it, is figuring out what those problems are and coming up with a fishing line where you can crisply communicate that. If you're an individual, you can be a little bit more flexible, but if you're building a firm, you have to really be known for something. So, and some people want to keep it somewhat broad and generic, but the broader you are, you think, oh, I'll have a bigger target, so I'm going to get more client opportunities, but it actually works in reverse. So the narrower and more focused your service offering is, the more you're going to be memorable and appeal to that audience, right?
If you target everyone, you'll get no one. That's a common phrase, I like to say. So
there's only so much jam, and the broader you spread it, the thinner this jam.
I know, and it's hard for freelancers to swallow. They might think, oh, well, the pool's so big, like I do search engine optimization. I don't want to narrow myself down. Well, guess what? Then you're going to be just a sea of everybody else competing for the lowest possible price, and that's not the way you want to win clients. So versus,
I do search engine optimization for outdoor companies based in Seattle, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Now you're focused on a niche.
You can build a very fine career just with that very targeted niche right there, and have no issues getting clients.
So so that targeting is important, and then it's then there's the infrastructure of your firm, and there's building your team. So in terms of infrastructure, we could certainly probably spend, like you said, you've done 68 videos on it. We could spend the whole sessions on that, but certainly having a CRM system in place is absolutely critical. I recommend Pipedrive, and I did an episode on Unleashed about that, I think episode 172, about how to set it up for a boutique consulting practice. So you're managing, you need to find some way to raise your visibility. I think there's really two main ways to raise your visibility. One is through thought leadership, creating content like you're doing, Mike, with your podcast. Thought leadership and creating human interactions. So on the thought leadership side, there's a wide range of channels you can choose. And in some, there could be a blog, podcast, YouTube videos, white papers, LinkedIn posts.
Dozens of them, yeah.
Right? Think about, and in some cases, if you do pick one, like podcasts, you can repurpose some of that content, turn it into blog posts or tweets or LinkedIn posts. And then I think thought leadership is critical, creating some form of content, because it's a way to do reminder advertising. If creating content allows you to, post on LinkedIn regularly, like, hey, I just did this episode. Hey, I just published this white paper, just published this article. Just remind people that you exist, even if they don't read it.
Yeah.
Even if they don't read it, you're reminding people, like, oh yeah, Mike exists. Oh yeah, Will exists. And part of that thought leadership, if you can incorporate and actually involve your target clients in that content creation, that's even better, right? So the consulting firm thing is to pick some topic and then go survey 20 executives and say, we interviewed 20 executives, and then quote them and so forth in the thought leadership piece, and then you send it back out to them and brief them on it, and they feel involved in it. So that's the classic. The other part, human interactions, you can think about one-on-one and more than one-on-one. So the one-on-one, it's, there's really in-person meetings, phone calls, and kind of electronic communications like emails. My view, I agree with David Fields, is really, you think about the cost of those versus the benefit. The benefit of one-on-one meeting, the impact that you have, is by far the highest, but it's also by far the highest cost in terms of your time.
Yes.
Whereas emails are the opposite. It's quick and easy, but it doesn't really create that much memory. Phone calls are probably the sweet spot in terms of it's a warm medium. You know, it's a warm interaction, but it's very low cost in terms of your time. So getting comfortable making a lot of phone calls, organizing more than one-on-one interaction, you know, organizing a small group breakfast of executives who are not competitive but might have something to share with one another, and you're that connector. That's another great way. So I'm kind of rambling on here to talk about this is kind of the basis of lead generation. Is you just got to remind people that you exist.
Nothing, no matter what technology comes, nothing replaces the in-person one-on-one, even though that is expensive in terms of time, and who knows how to get there. I've flown across the country to meet clients before, prospects, but the conversion is just so much higher. And things like this, like Zoom, help too. They provide a bridge between phone calls and in person, right? So that's always a good option.
Oh yeah, Zoom is a way to go. I love Zoom. I use it myself, and it's definitely a couple steps above telephone. I mean, you're seeing me, I'm seeing you. It's a much warmer interaction than even the phone. Exactly.
So if you were to pick one mistake that freelancers typically make but can't avoid, what would that mistake be? What advice would you give them to say, don't do this or do this, that most freelancers that don't listen to content like this wouldn't know?
All right. So I'll give you, probably your other guests have given you like really profound ones. Let me give you a trivial one, but an easy one to avoid.
Okay.
From day one, the broad context is from day one, start treating it like you're truly a professional, right? Like you're serious about this. Think about, and what that means is a couple implications of that is come up with a name for your firm and create an LLC. All right. Get yourself a corporate entity. Don't mess around just operating under your social security number. Treat it like a business.
Yes.
This follow-on piece of that is, get branded email, whether you use G Suite or some Microsoft thing. Don't go around using an AOL.com address, right, or a Yahoo.com.
Yes. Instant reduction in credibility when you do that.
I mean, you wouldn't hire like an accountant or attorney or bookkeeper that was going around using a AOL.com address. It makes it seem like, they're in the 90s. So grow up, treat it like a professional, get a professional logo made, get a website, get business cards, get some correspondence cards, get yourself a PowerPoint logo, template if that's what you do, branded, and treat it like a professional.
Yes, absolutely. Good tips. G Suite Basic, which gives you an email address per your domain, is $6 a month.
Yeah.
If a logo is $5 in Fiverr, so Fiverr.com. It's not that's something that's out of reach. Back in 30 years ago, you had to hire a graphic designer and an artist to make you a custom logo. None of that is needed anymore. So take advantage of the times that we live in. So how can our audience find and follow you online and your advice? You got Umbrex, umbrex.com. Is that right?
Yeah, it stands for Umbrella of Excellence.
Nice.
So you got it, umbrex.com. If you go to the Unleash tab, you can check out the podcast. Mike, if you include my LinkedIn URL in the show notes, just mention that this is where you heard it. Those are the best places: Umbrex.com, LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'll put a link into your LinkedIn profile so people can connect with you as well. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I'll touch base with you very soon. Hopefully we can have you on in the future.
Mike, it has been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks, Will. See you later. Bye.